Welcome to a new episode of Business Meets Life. And as you can see, yes, we are still in Sydney, Australia, but we are here at amazing Hawke's Brewing with wonderful Nathan Lennon. Now, who is Nathan? As a co-founder of Hawke's Brewing, Nathan Lennon has helped build one of Australia's most distinctive beer and hospitality brands, connecting nostalgia to modern relevance. With a background as a creative director in advertising agencies in the Australian, UK, and US markets, including Ad-Age Agency of the Decade, Droga 5 New York, very famous, Nathan operates at the intersection of creativity, business, and culture, with a focus on creating culturally meaningful, commercially effective work. His approach seems very simple, right? Find what matters in culture, then make it matter in business. Wow, thank you so much for making time. It is Easter, Good Friday, and you are here. How are you?
Happy Good Friday. Yeah, it's lovely to have you.
Lovely. Happy to be here. So let's start with the question that probably everyone just asked you, right?
Yeah.
And we do have a couple of listeners that are outside of Australia and also outside of China. How and why did Hawke's Brewing actually start, and what was the deeper purpose behind it?
Okay, this is definitely a story that I've told a million times, and hopefully gotten a little bit better at telling over the years. So Hawke's, I suppose, like many businesses, probably started by accident.
Okay.
Yeah, I was living in New York at the time, in my former life as a creative director in advertising, and I was in my dream job. Me and my creative partner, who is now the other co-founder of Hawke's, David Gibson, and I, had been working at Droga 5 for about 2 years. We were climbing up the ranks, pushing out great work. Obviously, like as I said, living in New York and just having the time of our lives. So absolutely no intention of moving back to Australia at that point. Nevertheless, I had just gotten back from a 3-week summer holiday back home for Christmas, and anyone that obviously lives far enough away from home after an extended period of time, and in particular myself, being such a kind of summer lover, had found myself back in New York at the Droga offices, sitting in the office with David one day. It was bucketing with snow outside, it was freezing cold, and something just didn't feel right.
Okay.
Yeah, and I guess I just kind of had this maybe pang of homesickness. Interesting, given that I'd only just come back, but it was probably a bit of the holiday blues. But also maybe just that real, clear contrast with where I was and where I just come from, and maybe an appreciation of that.
What was your age back then? If you don't mind me asking.
Well, we're roughly the same age, David and I, so I think we're probably in our late 30s, I'd say 38, I would say. And I probably was just starting to bother David more than anything else, and complaining about, this doesn't feel right, we should be back home, we'd be at the beach right now, we'd be at the pub, all that sort of stuff. He would have been ignoring me, trying to get on with work, and I just asked him a question, and it was the question that probably changed the course of our lives.
Wow.
And the question was, and it obviously started with, mate,
very Australian.
if you could be back home in Australia right now, having a beer with anybody, like fantasy beer buddy, who would it be? And that turned his chair around.
And he said Bob Hawke or what?
He absolutely said Bob Hawke, because I thought he was just going to say one of our friends or his younger brother or something like that. And yeah, he said, I've always wanted to have a beer with Bob Hawke. And for those who are unfamiliar with who Bob Hawke is, Bob Hawke was former Prime Minister of Australia. He's the second longest serving Labor Prime Minister. and probably I would say arguably Australia's most iconic Prime Minister in terms of the combination of political greatness, but also connected, an ability to connect to the people. And the 1980s in Australia, when he was in government from 1983 up to 1991, was a incredibly pivotal period for Australia. It was probably that moment that we went from being a country that was probably considered that cute sort of dinky-die country at the bottom of the world to becoming a country on the world stage. Lots of sport, investment in sport and tourism and culture, and some important sort of decisions that were made in government with Bob Hawke's government, with economic reform, healthcare, all these sorts of things that really laid the foundation for the future of our country. So he's an incredibly well-respected man. But on top of that, fun fact about Bob Hawke was when he was a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford University, he managed to set the world record for the quickest chug or skull of a yard of beer.
I heard about that, yeah.
Which is 1.4 litres of beer, which he drank in 11 seconds.
Oh my gosh.
And the story behind that's pretty funny. So he turned up to university, and as part of almost the initiation, anyone that was new that didn't wear their university gown into the dining hall. This is a very traditional school, obviously Oxford.
Yeah.
Lots of rules, lots of tradition. If they'd forgotten to wear their gown, or they didn't kind of present themselves as the university would want, the punishment was they had to buy a beer for everybody in the university hall.
Oh my gosh.
Unless they were able to set the university record for the quickest scull of a yard of beer.
It sounds like a fraternity, though.
Yeah, it's kind of like perfect for Bob. Perfect for Bob, right? So equal parts academic, equal parts larrikin. He confessed that he didn't really have a cent to his name. He didn't have the ability to buy everyone a beer, so he had to give this challenge a shot, and he not only ended up breaking the university record, he set the world record.
Oh my gosh.
And I would say that above all of his political achievements and everything, it's probably the one thing that had endeared him to Australians over anything else, and it's sort of become this thing that helped him connect back to the Australian people, even in his old age, where well into his 80s, he would turn up to big sports games, cricket and whatnot, with 40,000 people in the stadium who would chant him on as he would kind of take a beer and knock it back, in record time for the joy of the Australian people, because we're easily pleased.
And it's interesting, when I spoke to, after we met and you were giving this panel discussion at South by Southwest a couple of months ago, I told people about Bob Hawke's and your brewery. And this is exactly the story I heard several times, right? I don't know much about Bob, but this is the first story everyone tells.
Yeah, it's the easiest one to remember. I think, given that there are a few things going on with this conversation that David and I were having after he said that he'd love to have a beer with Bob Hawke, because it was immediate for me as well. I was like, that's such a great answer. And I think he also was incredibly emblematic for us of not just a time in Australia in the 1980s that we really revered for so many reasons. I mean, I think just being creatives, there was just such an incredible moment for culture in terms of kind of like music, art, film, all that stuff. It really has a distinctiveness, that period of time, and we've seen it come back into fashion even and into trend. But he also just represents, that 80s period also was the golden age of our childhood. So it's a period in which, and maybe we were protected through that period of time, because I'm sure the 80s wasn't always as incredible as what we think it is. probably connects us back to, and I'll probably go into this in terms of like purpose a little bit down the line. This sense of kind of probably like belonging, or this sense of, you know, where we most felt connected to ourselves and probably connected to other people, because, you know, you're the center of your own universe when you're a child. You know, and that period of time, I guess, you know, we had good upbringings and, you know, really, really cherished kind of era for us. So all in combination, and Bob Hawke at the time was our Prime Minister, and that's all we knew, as he's the leader of our country, and he's got this sort of charisma to him that, you know, you don't even need to know anything about politics, but he's just got that magnetism to him that, you know, even as a child, you have this kind of awestruck admiration of this guy, because of just his ability to, you know, to connect.
And it's interesting, like I think I wrote down sense of belonging and connectedness to ourselves and others. I feel like a lot of people have lost that, especially in these times of uncertainty. And to be honest, it's one of the reasons why I also run this podcast, because I feel like people need role models again. It sounds like that in a specific kind of way.
Yeah.
Bob was a huge small model and an inspiration. And I mean, that's why I also have you here, because the more I get to know you, I can see more and more why I think you are an inspiration and a role model, especially now that I get to know more about it.
Thank you. Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's what we recognised in Bob, almost as this symbol of what it means to be the best of being Australian.
Yeah. So then basically, after you had the conversation with David and so on, at one point you ended up in the kitchen.
Yeah, so
pitching the idea, right? How did it get there, and how did he react when you kind of like came up with a pitch to him?
Well, it's a crazy story. So about an hour into that conversation in our office in New York, we devised this idea that, you know, the one thing that would be better than having a beer with Bob Hawke would be to start a beer company with him, which is just madness, because at the time he was 86 years old.
Oh, wow.
And the only reason I think we even entertained the idea of even reaching out to him was our former boss back in Australia was really good friends with him. Sat on some charity boards, played golf with him all the time. They were like genuine mates. So we just kind of had a pathway to at least getting some kind of proposal to him. So, you know, we sent the liaison to Bob an email saying, oh, we've got this idea, we'd like to see if Bob Hawke's maybe interested in having a discussion about it. At that point, we didn't even put a proposal together. We just kind of had this like email of like, what do you reckon? And he went off and asked Bob immediately and came back and said, oh, it's a no. Bob's not interested. Which makes sense, because, you know, he doesn't know us. There's no presentation. There's nothing that's been articulated that in any way kind of would give him any confidence for us to even proceed with the conversation. But
you didn't accept the no?
Absolutely not. Well, we knew that we hadn't been given the opportunity to put our best foot forward. So we just said, look, let us put together a really short proposal, 3 pages, and allow us to kind of send that back to Bob. And, you know, after that, if he says no, we'll leave him alone. So maybe about 2 weeks later, we put together like a really short proposal, emailed it back, and David and I at the time made a handshake agreement that if Bob came back to us with anything but like a hard no, absolutely not, thanks guys, but there's no way I'm going to do this, we would quit our jobs and we would figure out a way to get him across the line properly. Like,
wow.
if he gave us like a little gap of an opportunity, so even if it was a maybe. About a week later, we get an email back via his wife, which said, Bob's a maybe. Would the boys be open to flying back to Australia to present at his home? Would we ever?
Wow.
That's not a yes, but we took that as a yes. And we also had made a handshake agreement. So we also realised that we had to now.
But you seriously quit the job, although you didn't have the final yes yet, or you quickly like went back to Australia, you pitched in, then you quit?
2 weeks later, because it took us 2 weeks to muster up the courage to do this, we walked into David Droger's office, and David Droger is, probably like the most well-known and iconic man in advertising. And we'd set a meeting with David, and he's been around the block a few times. He knows when two creatives go and set a meeting with him, it's for only one reason. Well, it's probably for only two reasons. One, can we get a pay rise? Two, we're off. We walked in. He's got that smug smile on his face where he thinks he knows exactly what we're there for. And
you want more money?
Yeah. We just sat down, and he said, "All right, where are you going? Where are you off to? Like, what agency are you guys going to go to?" And we said, "No, we're not going to another agency. We're quitting advertising. We're going to go start a beer company with Bob Hawke." And you can't talk us out of it because he's already said yes.
Oh, that was amazing.
So we lied. And then we left David's office. "Congratulations, guys. This is incredible. I would never hold you back from this. This is an amazing opportunity. If there's anything I can do to help, let me know," etc., etc. We left David's office, and we're like, "Oh my God, we're in so much shit if this doesn't pan out. Bob doesn't give us the yes. What are we going to do?" But it was like, we believed in it.
Wow. So much confidence. And even when you started the company, did you actually take any external money investment in it, or you literally also finance everything yourself?
Everything, yeah. Sold property, bootstrapped the whole thing at the start. Severely underestimating how much capital we were going to need to.
Okay, so tell us, like, what happened then, like when you were in his home?
So then, yep.
That's better than a movie, guys. You might need to take some popcorn because it's that good.
Booked the flight back to Australia. Spent 2 weeks prior to the meeting. Probably like just finalising the document. We only get one chance at this. Putting together a pitch to the former Prime Minister of Australia. The morning of, we're on our way to Northbridge, which is where he lives in Sydney, and we stop off at a cafe. We get there really early, just so we're not late. We stop off at a cafe to go over our pitch again, have a coffee. The most nervous we've probably ever been in our lives. We've done a lot of presentations, but this was, this was our lives, and we'd already quit our jobs. So everything on the line. We receive a text from our liaison, who was already at the house, to say, "Bob wants a coffee. Can you get him a cappuccino with 2 sugars?" Classic. Like, we're now the errand boys. So for the next 15 minutes, everything was about making sure that we get this coffee to Bob Hawke's house without it spilling. Make sure that it's exactly what he wants. The presentation it doesn't even matter anymore. It's all about this coffee. And then we rock up to Bob's house, and we meet our liaison, and he takes us downstairs, and we can hear Bob's voice in the distance. And for those who don't know or haven't seen or heard Bob Hawke, he's very distinctive in how he sounds. It's just a very iconic voice, even into his old age.
I see the excitement in your face.
And that was a moment for us because it's real, it's happening. We're about to meet this absolute icon. What are we doing? This is crazy. We thought that we were going to have a presentation in some kind of big boardroom, big oak table, Bob Hawke, being very prime ministerial, sitting at the other end of the table, blazer and whatnot, because we dressed up. We go into his kitchen, and inside the kitchen was a tiny little kitchenette table, newspapers strewn all across the table, of which we were supposed to make our presentation. And Bob was sitting on the other side of it, partially in his pajamas, tracksuit. I think he had his slippers on, or maybe one of the slippers was on and the other slipper was under the table somewhere else. And it looked like he just got up, and he was in a cranky mood.
Oh God!
He didn't like waking up early, but this was an 11 o'clock meeting. He thought we'd turn up early. He was a little bit confused as to who we even were. he couldn't hear very well because he was getting older, and it was super awkward. So because being control freaks, everything was supposed to play out exactly how we'd scripted it, how we prepared for it, and whatnot, and it's just not going to plan immediately. So we're even more nervous. We sit down and we start presenting, and it was probably a 30-minute pitch. And about 10 minutes into the actual pitch itself, so we hadn't even really got right into the guts of, some of the detail around kind of giving him confidence that we were going to run the business. It was more just, here's the idea, here's the brand, here's the packaging, here's our kind of general purpose around what we think this is. And he closes the presentation, and he was given this big folder to flip through, and he closed that, and he stops us and said,
"Oh God, what happened then?"
That's exactly what we thought. Oh God! And he asked us, "Look, this is all fine. I can probably look through the rest of this later. I just want to ask you a question."
Oh, another very powerful question, guys.
And these were his words. "I want you to give me an honest answer, and don't bullshit me. Why is this going to work?" And we'd been around the block in terms of we knew that when you go into a big meeting, you put together a bunch of questions, which we would call grenades, that someone can throw into the room, which would completely dismantle your meeting if you didn't already have an answer. So we'd written our little FAQ. If Bob asks us this is our line response. That's
so corporate, so well trained.
Which makes you even more nervous sometimes, which is why I don't like to prepare for podcasts.
Good, better for me.
And so Dave is next to me in an absolute puddle. He's not even moving. And I just heard the word honest. And so I just said, "Look, Mr. Hawke, with all due respect, this has got to work. Because not only have we already quit our jobs, we've told our boss that you've already said yes." And I could feel Dave next to me kind of now looking at me glaring.
Why are you saying that?
Going, "What have you just done?" There was this dramatic pause, and then Bob just starts chuckling and says, "Well, that's not a smart answer, but it is an honest answer. And I'd be a bum if I said no to that." And we didn't even know what that even meant because we were so petrified in our seats. And our liaison, who was down the other end of the table, just said, "I think that's your yes, boys. I think Bob's in." And it was a really surreal moment, I suppose, because it was happening. And then we went out into the balcony of his home, and we sat with him for about an hour and a half. And we brought some cigars. He loves Cuban cigars, and we sat outside and we watched him smoke some cigars, and we just asked him 100 questions and allowed him to kind of just regale us with a lot of political war stories, and he loved telling a joke, and we just sort of soaked it up, and we left his home, and we went to a celebratory Chinese meal at an institution in Sydney called Golden Century. Yeah.
I actually was about to ask. So in here, you have basically the brewery, which is part of the same building. Right next to it, you have the restaurant now. You have a bar. You basically have a lot of facilities all in one. And I was wondering, why did you come up with a Chinese restaurant, especially in this kind of concept? Plus, why Lucky Prawn? What was then later the connection to opening this Chinese restaurant next to running this beer brand?
Good question, and we get asked that. Look, for us, it was pretty obvious. Hawke's was never really about, beer for us. It was never about. I think beer is an output. Chinese food is an output. What it really represents for us is something connected from a cultural perspective for those of us that do have that kind of resonance with those sorts of moments in Australian culture. And, you know, the Chinese part of it was, I suppose, equal parts story, equal parts commercial. On the story side of it, you know, we wanted to ensure that every touch point, every moment within the entire Hawke's experience, particularly in the venue, felt authentic to the story, to the Australian story. And I think there's nothing more Australian than going out to Chinese. This was certainly the case in the 1980s.
Oh, wow.
Because the Chinese had this incredible migration story into Australia in the 1960s. And the only way that they could kind of like get some kind of agency over their own kind of like life and employment was to introduce Cantonese food and restaurants, but not necessarily just through the metro areas, but out into all the regional areas, which is why pretty much anywhere you go in Australia, even if it's a small country town, probably going to be a Chinese restaurant there on the main road.
We all love Chinese food.
We all love it, right? It's very egalitarian. It's very easy, and it's built around sharing, and it's built around you know, kind of getting together around a big table. Sometimes a lazy Susan in the middle.
Right.
The novelty, and so if you can imagine when you're a little kid going out to a restaurant like that, incredibly vibrant colours, the aesthetics, just the art direction of the restaurants, they're super kitsch, and you know, there's always a fish tank and, you know, crazy carpet and fortune cookies, and it's just like this theatrical wonderland of an experience that really just kind of lights you up, I think, not just as a child, but, you know, even as an adult.
Yeah.
So that was a really important piece for us in terms of, well, one, we wanted to control our own food operation. We didn't want to outsource that.
Yeah.
We wanted another piece to the Hawke's brand that felt that it could scale alongside of just beer. So we weren't relying on just one vertical. And as I said, it's built around sharing. So we knew the venue itself was going to be a destination. It's not on a main road. There's not a lot of foot traffic walking past. So people have to come here deliberately, you know, and they make an effort, and they've got to book ahead because it's really busy. So you've got, you know, 6 groups of 6 to 10 people, guaranteed, sitting around a table. Spend per head is high. So spend per head's around it's around $90 a person, average in and out. Whereas if you're going to do pizza, you're going to do, you know, kind of like pub food. It's kind of just like, well, a pizza's $25.
Very smart.
Hummies are steaks and whatnot, you know, between kind of like $30 and $40. You know, we want to give them an experience, but we also want to maximise, you know, their time in the venue as well. Because the longer they're here, the longer the meal, the more they drink. You know, because they've got to kind of complement each other, because we're very big about pushing out our beer brand as well.
Right.
So it's holistically what fits into the entire experience that sits under this very clear and simple thought about, you know, bringing these really meaningful moments to people that feel, I guess, unmistakably Australian.
Yeah, the more I get to know your brand, the more I'm just excited about it, especially learning about these culture things. And I would definitely say your brand is an icon, and the thoughts of connection. We're definitely I'll make sure that with the business club where I'm a member, we're also gonna come, because I really love the story. So many brands nowadays, they don't really have a purpose, or on the paper we have vision, mission, purpose, but nobody actually really like lives it. And that's one of the reasons why I love working for HP the first 7 years, because the company culture really formed me a lot, and I took so many aspects out of it later on when I started my own company. And that connection is just so much deeper. And especially the younger generations nowadays, they need this kind of like sense and purpose and sustainability and all these things. So culture is a key word for you here, and connection and sharing. how have you implemented the culture part in your brand? I mean, unfortunately, you guys cannot really see it. We'll have later some pictures and videos, but just in this room that we're in here, there's tons of pictures from Bob, from Australia, from different kind of, I don't know, historic happenings, I think. So how have you implemented culture in your brand, in your business? What else?
Well, culture can mean different things, obviously, in terms of how culture shows up with, how we integrate it into the experience and into the brand is probably different in a way in which it works for maybe our internal culture, the culture that we try and build around, what's going to drive a high performance business. But there is an overlap. I think for the brand side, it's really about storytelling. And if you know Hawkes, you'll know that we're incredibly deliberate and intentional with everything we do to ensure that it always shows up authentic. But there are nuances. So culture shows up through the hospitality experience, probably through more of a nostalgic lens. So it's really about tapping into that kind of really profound, kind of emotion that nostalgia can bring, which is very much how the company started. It was really about homesickness, thinking back to, a time in our lives where, we would love to kind of hop in a time capsule and go back and have those experiences and those feelings again. And for us, it's about really delivering those feelings back to our guests, because it's not just our story, this is their story. And I think that's when brands, can really, really find their feet. Everyone says it's the ability to connect, but I think what it really is this resonance where if someone can see themselves in your brand, if they can see their own story in your brand, then that's a bigger win.
Yeah.
So we get that here because people walk in the door, and particularly if they're sort of maybe like over 45, they have that moment, and then they walk around the venue, and then we just saturate their experience with so much detail, so many storytelling moments, regardless of whether they're coming into the pool room and looking around the museum, or whether they're having Chinese food, or whether they're in the toilets, where we've got the commentary of an iconic cricket commentator. It's not just about what you see, it's about what you smell, with the sizzling beef that a waiter might walk past.
Right.
It's what you taste, which is the beer and that sense of, well, I'm back in a pub from the 1980s. Like there's that sort of sense. So it's this total sensory experience that you have the ability to inject cultural moments.
Yeah.
And it's really fun because these things exist already. You don't have to make them up out of nothing.
Yeah.
You just have to be super curious, have discussions with anybody. Like a lot of the ideas in here, they're not just ours. Like these are some of the staff's ideas, and I think that's when you've got something that you can really build on, when an idea feels like someone else can also kind of layer on their own thoughts. And as long as it's authentic. The culture piece for the company side, it's a little bit more built around values. And I think you can get really corporate. The values thing is something that a lot of companies kind of use as a bunch of words you put up in a kind of room.
Yeah.
And,
you don't really live it.
You don't really live it. The values for us obviously come out of Hawke himself. But I think they're shared values, things that kind of resonate with all of us. So things like generosity, showing up generously, not just in terms of what we do as a business and in terms of charity give back and whatnot, but also just behaviourally, how we can be generous with each other. On top of that, authenticity is an overused value for a lot of businesses, but it's something that we really genuinely live, and it's a standard that's really important for us.
But I think also when I met you and you were in this panel discussion talking about branding, I think that was the topic. I could feel these values, and that's why you stuck out to me. Next to, I mean, the other company owners were great as well, right? But there was something in terms of values, how you presented, how you spoke, that I could already see, okay, there is something different. And I was so new in Australia. I had no, I mean, I'm German, but I have no idea about beer. I don't even drink beer unless it's called Oktoberfest in Munich because you must, right? So I think you are really like the real example, and I can see the authenticity. Now, coming back to your agency background, having this as a background is amazing because I can see and understand even more how you've implemented it. And also for the others out there, that's why it makes sense to sometimes get real experts for your company. How do you now manage this company, but also now you have your own agency on the side, right? I think it's called the Ministry of Communication and Arts. I've also seen you've done a really nice project recently on, again, like giving back. You were saying, I think there was like a cancer project and charity and so on that you have supported. How do you manage both of the brands, like running two companies?
Well, these days it's a little bit easier for me because, both David and I finally got to that point in the business where maybe it was a combination of adrenal fatigue and burnout of trying to build a beer company from the ground up with not a lot of capital, but maybe really wanting to see the business succeed and scale, and knowing that we're not really born CEOs. I think ultimately we did what we had to do to get the business to the point where we could hire a CEO and build a management team and put the right people in the right places to ensure that, just covering the risk, because it's always a risk when you're trying to scale any business, but particularly one with terrible margins like beer. And hospitality is always obviously really challenging as well.
And then also COVID and...
Oh yeah, all that. So...
in which year did it happen that you were able to replace yourself and have a CEO?
2022.
So how many years were you in the business? 6 years?
Yeah, so about 6. Yeah, 6. So that was day to day. And then naturally we still wanted to keep an eye on all things brand.
Yeah.
That's was the ultimate dream for us really, is to get the business to a point not where we would completely step away, but where we'd be able to have full focus on the thing that we knew that we could provide the most value, which is that brand and marketing side. So that's how it works now, where we sit on our board, obviously, which for the most part is kind of managing that governance picture and risk and all that stuff. But day to day, it's more about kind of just being the guardians of the creative product that goes out, and making sure that that standard is always kind of set. But we're really lucky because everybody lives and breathes it here, and how important it is. So that was kind of gave us the opportunity, obviously, with a bit more time to have a think about. Well, we've learned a lot. Still got a hell of a lot more to learn, but maybe we could step back into that sort of creative services agency world on a project basis at least, and see if we can see if we've still got it. But
I think you do. I mean, we can see a lot of good results here.
And that's where the Ministry for Communication and the Arts started. And the reason for that name was it was something that was originally intended just to simply service Hawke's. So if you could think about it like an internal advertising agency for the business, the government thing, the ministry for the department for, that just made sense from the way in which to brand it. Incredibly long-winded kind of agency name, but it felt like something that in itself made sense as its own brand.
I like that idea.
And then we just very lightly reached out to ex-colleagues and whatnot, and one of our ex-colleagues was you know, the CMO of a cancer charity, and you know, we helped them out you know, a couple of years ago with a really special project.
Seen that one. Yeah. Let me ask you very directly. If your business disappeared tomorrow, any of your businesses, okay, would people genuinely miss it? And how should founders think about that question?
Yeah, I love that question. You know, I think it's something to aspire to, and I don't think necessarily it's always ever going to be the case. I think some businesses are purely utilitarian, and I think for us, people would miss it, and I think even more so as we're starting to kind of, well, I think we're already in that sort of that era now with technology, device usage, obviously AI. We're getting pulled into the matrix deeper and deeper, and we're aware of it, but we're at that point where I think this craving for the analog, for the human, which is all the things that we deliver as a business and a brand at Hawke's. If you think about it, like we're an incredibly in real life brand. Obviously, because so much of it is steeped into that sort of nostalgic hospitality experience. That I do think this is a really it is an important type of business. And I don't necessarily just mean our business, but I think hospitality especially, with the opportunity to bring people together, whether it's kind of out for a meal or at the pub having a drink, really does matter. I think it's something that we probably took for granted when we didn't have these kinds of technologies that were distracting us. But today, and as we evolve, it's going to be more and more important to have businesses like this. So I certainly think that there is a role for that, and people genuinely miss Hawke's, because I don't really see too many other Australian brands that give them exactly what we give in the way in which we give it.
For me, it was definitely an experience as a non-Australian coming here for sure. I mean, I lived in China for 8.5 years, as you know, so we do business through the dinner table or like lunch table. Just like after this podcast, I'm actually meeting 3 people, all Chinese business owners, discussing some business, but we're doing it over lunch, right? So it is so important, as you said. And now I understand, I know at your bar you have this, I think it is a statue of Bob Hawke, or you were like asking with who would you like to have a beer, and then you guys also named down a couple of different people. And now it's all starting to make sense and I understand it. Speaking of different kind of culture, because with the agency work that you have done, I mean, you've worked across Australia, UK, the US. How does culture differ across these markets when it comes to building brands that resonate?
Well, I mean, I think quite simply it's just having an intimate understanding of what matters to people in all these cultures. But cultures can be a broad statement. It can also be something that has nuance to it, depending on kind of what we're talking about, whether we're talking about kind of specific kind of areas of culture like arts and whatnot, whether it's religion or so for us, that was a really, really good test actually, to appreciate the distinction between cultures, because you can't necessarily just pick up and go to another country and expect that you're going to be able to, particularly with what we do, which in advertising, it's about persuasion, right? It's about trying to find those kinds of moments of connection that really do resonate, and you have to be on the same page with people. And I think maybe the privilege of youth is you can't help but be curious, and you can't help but be sucked into some of the kind of cultural kind of pieces of other markets. But there are nuances. I mean, we found that the work that we were doing in the UK, and we were a lot younger, we were still kind of cutting our teeth in the industry, but there was a much more dignified, kind of much more grown up and much more sophisticated type of work that we were expected to create in the UK, as you would expect. and when we were in the States, it was about pushing work out that would create the media storm. Because culture in America is incredibly media driven, and it's incredibly talent driven and celebrity driven. So having those like understandings of what are the levers for performance, what are the levers for growth from a cultural perspective that you have to really kind of work through the look through the lens of these like specific things, and that's when you kind of have to almost torture test your ideas around that. And obviously it's about finding those truths, finding those like not just human insights but cultural insights, and that hopefully those things start to connect. And then how do these ideas, how can you deploy them into the vehicles that are going to give that brand and that business those genuine commercial opportunities. And in Australia, I think we're a little bit confused sometimes in the nation because we're so young. We sort of have our own identity. We certainly have our own culture. Like I think Australians maybe take for granted that we always kind of compare ourselves to other parts of the world and say that we don't have culture, but we kind of have our own.
Yeah.
But we also take on other countries' cultures. Like we're very Americanized. So it can be a little bit confusing as to sort of what's right, what's going to resonate. But my comfort lane, quite obviously, is really sort of focusing on some of the more sort of intimately Australian cultural pieces.
Speaking of identity, who's Nathan outside of your work?
That's such a good question. Look, I just like I find purpose in connection, like everybody else, and I think Hawke's might have been a business, but what I learned about it in terms of my own identity was it was really like I started to have an understanding of my I guess the importance for myself of that sense of belonging. And I get that through obviously a connection back to something that other people feel connected to, like finding that common ground. So I get that in Australia through hanging out with my mates and just doing cultural things together. So like going to the footy together, going to the pub, all those types of things. Spend a lot of time on the beach because I live in Bondi.
Yeah, nice.
So that lifestyle, and I've found that as much as I've tried to maybe kind of escape all these things and add layers to myself, move to other countries and live city lives and all that, I always gravitate back to the beaches in Australia, and I think it's become apparent to me that how important that is, not from a superficial perspective, but maybe just kind of that sense of my own identity that feels really authentic.
Thanks for sharing. So having worked in an agency, it's really tough. Plus being a business owner, what keeps you, like, do you have specific habits or things or ways of thinking that keep you sharp, creative, and grounded, especially in very challenging times where maybe you might think, oh, I'm just going to stop it, I'm going to give up, or it's never going to work out?
It depends on how much you're in it. I think, like if I could go back to the hardest parts of running Hawke's with David, I would say the one thing that probably fell away was just the balance, just the self-care, and I don't know whether I would have been able to convince myself to do it any other way, because it's just all consuming 7 days a week. But I would say as I'm exploring more opportunities to get a lot more productive again, I think the one thing that I want to be able to maintain is what there are things that you can control. So, and as I'm getting older now, I'm kind of even more aware of how critical it is to, you know, look after yourself, exercise, do all the things, walk. You need to do some breath work, whatever it is. But also, importantly for a man, because I know men are good at this, is don't isolate yourself too much, you know, and don't carry the burden of, you know, the challenges that are coming your way as a business owner, as a person, as a dad, if you've got children, as a partner, as a friend. You know, we're all really busy. You know, we're all stressed. But I think, you know, we probably hide behind the excuse of work a lot. So I think, you know, I have no issue with the concept of the working past 5 o'clock and the working of weekends and whatnot, as long as it's lighting you up, as long as if you're passionate about it. I think that's healthy. I don't subscribe to doing it kind of years on end, but everyone's different. But I think that's the importance for me of finding purpose in the work, the businesses and whatnot that I do that feel very much aligned with what I believe in outside of those businesses. I mean, I started a beer company and a restaurant and a bar, which from the outside looks like all you must do is kind of drink and eat Chinese food and have rice. But it's further from the truth. It could be further from the truth, because running these types of businesses can be a lot. But they're very much connected to kind of the ways in which I kind of do like to connect, you know, outside of work in an online way.
Yeah. So what do you think has been your biggest failure in life?
My biggest failure in life.
Or maybe a mistake you made that you regret?
I think it's not really a mistake. I think it's more of a mindset. I think, and everybody probably feels a bit guilty of this, but it's probably just caring too much about what people think, you know, not kind of backing yourself and overestimating what people think, and you know, nobody's transfixed as you think on what it is that you're doing and all that sort of stuff. So I think buying into that maybe a little bit too much, and kind of chasing these kind of superficial things that I think maybe add value to myself in the world, in the eyes of the world around me. You know, I think that mindset, you know, it's just wasteful. But I think maybe you only kind of get this sort of like little nuggets of wisdom as you get a little bit older.
Yeah.
But I certainly think that's kind of, you know, that's something that, you know, if I could speak to the younger version of myself, I'd try and convince him that, you know, all that stuff doesn't matter as much. You know, just follow your heart and, you know, don't kind of attribute value and worth to yourself because of these other things that you think people think, because they're not even thinking about that with you.
Did you see my last question? Because you kind of answered that question now.
Right, no, I haven't.
We're slowly coming to an end. I know we're overdue already, and the restaurant is about to open now. Who of our listeners, I mean, we have a very global audience, more and more people from Australia, but also from the world. Who should connect with you? Who should reach out to you?
Oh, well, I think if you ever get the opportunity to come to Sydney, you know, I do like to think, and this was part of our maybe kind of like achievement mission as a business and a brand, you know, is to create one of the best tourist destinations for someone that's never been to Australia before, never been to Sydney before. You know, I think visiting the Bob Hawke Beer and Leisure Centre and the Lucky Prawn will give you that, you know, almost like crash course in Australian culture and you know, the Australia that we can show you, as opposed to maybe the Australia that you know, people around the world kind of lean into in terms of cliche and all those sorts of things that make Australia kind of cute as a country. But you know, for an authentic experience, you know, I think we've done a really good job at you know, bringing that to life here. And like, it's alcohol and Chinese food, so you can't complain.
I love it. Thank you so much for making time, especially on a public holidays.
Yeah.
Guys, sharing is caring. Start following Nathan on his social media. Yes, when you're in Sydney, make sure that you definitely go and check this place out. Even for me, as a German non-beer drinker, I gotta say it's so cool. You can also play pool and do many other great activities. I think Nathan is absolutely an inspiration, especially if anyone out there is building a brand, improving your brand. Go back to like the purpose. I love how he's talking about connection and sharing. And yeah, that was really inspirational. Thank you for that.
It's a pleasure.
And guys, subscribe to my YouTube and Spotify Business Meets Life, and please spread it, like it, and who knows, sometimes it just takes this one thing that Nathan or one of our speakers said, it might change your life. Leave also comments. I'd love to hear about it. Take care. Happy Easter.